On a sun-drenched Monaco road, a princess's life came to a screeching halt as her car plunged 120 feet down a ravine. So what really happened in that car? Controversial eyewitness accounts swore her teenage daughter Stephanie was driving, a catastrophic secret that her own new family, Monaco's ruling House of Grimaldi, known as the Palace, immediately buried by crushing the car into a cube and sinking it deep into the sea. Tonight, we reveal the evidence behind this ultimate betrayal and the lifetime of shocking secrets the family she married into fought to conceal. The official story of a tragic stroke was backed up and disseminated by the palace with breathtaking speed, becoming global news before the full truth of the crash could even begin to surface. But a powerful counter-narrative, born from roadside whispers, took root almost immediately. The princess was not at the wheel at all. This single explosive secret is just the beginning of the story, unlocking a lifetime of hidden truths the House of Grimaldi fought to conceal. From the humiliating clinical price Grace paid for her crown, to the Hollywood career she was forbidden to reclaim. To understand the conspiracy of her death, one must first understand the conspiracy of her life. A story of a woman whose reality was always a carefully guarded secret. Before she was a princess, she was Hollywood royalty. But she was never truly one of them. Grace Patricia Kelly was an outsider from the start, a product of the rigid, fiercely competitive world of Philadelphia's high society. Her father, John B. Jack Kelly, was a titan, a self-made millionaire in the bricklaying business, and a 3-time Olympic gold medalist in rowing. He was a man carved from granite, a patriarch who demanded excellence and was famously stingy with his praise. This was the first secret of Grace Kelly. Her ambition was forged in the cold shadow of her father's indifference. Jack Kelly openly favored his athletic, outgoing older daughter, Peggy, leaving Grace in a perpetual, painful quest for his validation. This deep-seated need to prove her worth to a powerful, withholding man would become a defining pattern in her life, dictating her choice in directors, in lovers, and ultimately in a husband. Her mother, Margaret, was no softer. A former cover model and a formidable academic, she was a strict Catholic who viewed Grace's chosen profession with a frosty disapproval. The world of acting, with its loose morals and public displays of emotion, was seen as undignified. With a father who ignored her and a mother who criticized her, Grace found little warmth at home, which pushed her to leave for New York and eventually seek the affection she craved in the arms of her co-stars. When she finally broke into Hollywood, the studio system crafted an image for her in collusion with director Alfred Hitchcock, the Ice Queen. She was marketed as a goddess of cool elegance, a sophisticated blonde who was beautiful but untouchable. It was a brilliant piece of marketing, and the public adored it. But it was a complete fabrication. Behind the camera, the Ice Queen was a woman of fiery, almost reckless passion. Her affair with Gary Cooper on the set of High Noon was immediate and intense. She was 22, he was 50 and married. The vast age gap and his marital status were irrelevant to her. She was drawn to his stature and quiet power, perhaps a reflection of the father she could never win over. Cooper, for his part, was utterly smitten, privately referring to the young ingenue as his favorite hobby. The pattern repeated itself with startling frequency. While filming Mogambo, she began a legendary romance with Clark Gable. This was followed by a turbulent affair with the married Ray Milland during Dial M for Murder, a relationship so serious it nearly destroyed his marriage. The list grew to include Bing Crosby and William Holden, forcing the studios to work frantically behind the scenes to extinguish the fires and protect the pristine myth of an innocent woman they had created. By 1955, Grace had conquered Hollywood, but across the Atlantic, a different kind of kingdom was on the verge of collapse. Monaco, a glamorous silver of a nation, was ruled by the young, unmarried Prince Rainier III. His principality was in a state of quiet crisis. A 1918 treaty with France stipulated that if he failed to produce an heir, Monaco would be absorbed by France. The nation's coffers were dwindling, and its prince was seen as a dour, isolated figure. The idea for a solution was not born of romance, but of ruthless business calculation, championed by Rainier's powerful friend, the Greek shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis. Onassis, who had major business interests in Monaco's casino, saw Grace Kelly as the ultimate marketing tool to lure wealthy Americans to its shores. He advised Rainier that a glamorous movie star wife would be the greatest asset imaginable for reviving the principality's fortunes. The meeting was arranged during the 1955 Cannes Film Festival. It was not a meet-cute, but a meticulously staged and awkward photo opportunity. Yet the photographs from that day were electric. The image of the American movie queen next to the European prince was a global sensation, a fairy tale waiting to be written. But behind the storybook images lay a series of cold, hard negotiations. This was an audition, and it came with shocking conditions. Before Rainier would formally propose, Grace had to secretly undergo a humiliating fertility examination to prove she could produce the necessary heir. Furthermore, her father was required to pay a staggering $2 million dowry, the equivalent of over $20 million today, for the privilege of his daughter marrying a prince. On April 19, 1956, the world stopped to watch the wedding of the century. 30 million people tuned in to see Grace in a gown of silk taffeta and antique lace become a princess. But as she walked down the aisle, she was an actress taking on her greatest role, a beautiful commodity purchased to save a floundering kingdom. The fairy tale the world was watching was a masterful illusion. The grand religious ceremony that was watched by the world was in fact the second wedding. The day before, Grace had to endure a cold, purely legal civil ceremony inside the palace's throne room, mandated by the Napoleonic Code of Monaco. Dressed in a simple suit, she recited her vows in French, a language she barely understood, in a brief bureaucratic procedure that legally sealed the $2 million dowry transaction. It was only after this clinical contractual obligation was met that the romantic fairy tale for public consumption could begin. It's difficult to overstate how desperate Monaco's situation was and why they gambled everything on Grace. Post-war Europe had changed, and the principality's reputation as a playground for Russian Grand Dukes and British aristocrats had faded. Its revenues were plummeting. The casino was seen as dated, and without the glamour Grace provided, it was on a trajectory to becoming a sleepy, irrelevant relic. Her arrival single-handedly reversed this decline, bringing in a flood of American tourists, investors, and media attention that literally saved the nation from financial ruin. The dream soured almost immediately. The 7-week honeymoon was a disaster, revealing Rainier to be a moody and controlling husband. When they returned to Monaco, the reality of her new life set in like a permanent winter chill. She had traded her freedom for a gilded cage. Her first barrier was language. Grace spoke barely a word of French, leaving her functionally mute and isolated in her own home, unable to communicate with staff or understand the palace politics swirling around her. She was forced to smile blankly through official functions, a beautiful but silent figurehead. Grace's isolation was made infinitely worse by the presence of her new sister-in-law, Prince Rainier's older sister, Princess Antoinette. Ambitious and resentful, Antoinette had long maneuvered for her own son to be named heir to the throne in the absence of a legitimate one from Rainier. She viewed Grace not as family, but as a foreign usurper who had thwarted her plans, and she reportedly treated her with icy disdain, spreading malicious gossip and working to undermine the new princess at every turn within the palace walls. While the world swooned, the local Monegasque people were initially deeply skeptical of their new American princess. To them, she was a fille de cinéma, a movie girl, an outsider who didn't understand their language, their Catholic faith, or their ancient traditions. Her early attempts at public outreach were often stiff and awkward, her carefully rehearsed French sounding foreign and distant. She had to work tirelessly for years to win over the hearts of 3,000 native citizens who now viewed her with suspicion. This was compounded by the suffocating grip of ancient royal protocol. Her every move was scrutinized, her natural American warmth dismissed as unrefined. The simple freedom of taking a spontaneous walk was gone forever, replaced by a life of scheduled, supervised appearances by a woman who was losing her very sense of self. In Hollywood, for all its fame, Grace could still find anonymity in a crowd. She could disappear into a role or behind sunglasses. But in Monaco, a nation smaller than New York's Central Park, she was the constant and inescapable center of attention. Every trip to the market, every visit to a shop became a state affair, trailed by photographers and dissected by the press. This total loss of privacy was a profound psychological shock, contributing to a sense of claustrophobia from which she could never escape. To combat her profound loneliness, Grace clung desperately to her old friends, flying them in from America and England for company. Friends like the actor David Niven, who lived nearby, became a crucial lifeline, offering a familiar, English-speaking respite from the formal French-speaking court that watched her every move. These visits were her only real escape, moments where she could shed the weight of her title and briefly be Grace Kelly again, not Her Serene Highness the Princess of Monaco. The most devastating blow, however, was the one that stripped her of her identity. Prince Rainier issued an unofficial royal decree. Princess Grace was forbidden from ever acting again. The palace then banned the screening of all her films within the principality, effectively erasing her celebrated past from her new home. According to palace insiders and biographers, Rainier's moodiness was a significant understatement. The prince was known to possess a volcanic temper, capable of sudden, furious outbursts that terrified his staff and his wife. He held a deeply traditional, almost archaic view of a wife's role. She was to be beautiful, dutiful, and subordinate. Grace's American independence and Hollywood-forged confidence often clashed with his authoritarian nature, leading to tense, difficult confrontations behind the palace's closed doors. The clash of cultures extended to the palace itself. Grace, with her modern American tastes, was horrified by the dark, dusty, and somewhat dilapidated state of the royal residence. When she initiated plans to renovate and redecorate, she was met with stiff resistance from the old guard staff, who saw her actions as an assault on tradition. Her battle to simply bring light and comfort into her own home became a metaphor for her larger struggle to carve out a space for herself in a world that resisted her at every turn. Her marriage also created a new, gilded distance from her own family back in Philadelphia. While the Kellys were immensely proud of their daughter's royal status, they were also intimidated by it. Visits became formal, stilted affairs overshadowed by the rigid demands of royal protocol. In turn, Grace could no longer relate to their lives, and this growing emotional distance from her parents and siblings only compounded her sense of being utterly alone in the world. Forbidden from practicing her craft, Grace refused to be a mere figurehead. With intelligence and determination, she began to build a new purpose for herself, transforming her role from decorative to active. She became the president of the Monaco Red Cross, founded Ahmad, a global child advocacy organization, and established the Princess Grace Foundation to support emerging artists in theater and dance. These weren't vanity projects. They were a calculated way for her to exercise her influence and create a meaningful legacy beyond the palace walls. One of her most successful efforts to win over her subjects was the establishment of the annual Christmas Gala for the children of Monaco. Drawing on her own American traditions, she transformed the palace into a winter wonderland and personally handed out gifts to every child. This gesture, so different from the court's usual formality, was a resounding success, humanizing her in the eyes of the local people and showing them a warmth and generosity they had not expected. The pressure to produce an heir had been immense from the moment she arrived. In 1957, the birth of her first child, Princess Caroline, was a moment of national celebration, but the unspoken anxiety remained. According to the laws of the time, true security for the nation and for Grace's position would only come with the son. This period was fraught with tension as the eyes of the world and the future of a nation rested squarely and unfairly on her. Finally, in 1958, cannons roared over the harbor to announce the birth of a male heir, Prince Albert. The celebration in Monaco was ecstatic. The Grimaldi dynasty was secure for another generation. For Grace, the birth was a moment of triumph and relief, as she had now fulfilled her single most important duty. Yet it also cemented her primary function in the eyes of the state. She was, above all else, the mother of the future sovereign. A few years later, in 1962, a lifeline appeared. Alfred Hitchcock offered her the complex lead role in his new thriller, Marnie. It was a dark, challenging part, and for Grace, it was a chance to escape, to feel like herself again. After tense negotiations, Rainier, seeing the financial potential, surprisingly agreed. But the announcement caused an uproar in Monaco. The press framed her desire to act as a betrayal of her royal duties. In the face of this backlash, Rainier folded. He publicly reversed his decision, claiming his people's objections made it impossible. For Grace, it was the ultimate betrayal, leaving her feeling not just trapped, but publicly abandoned by her own husband. Alfred Hitchcock was reportedly heartbroken and bitter over the Marnie affair. He felt that he had discovered Grace Kelly and molded her into the perfect actress, only to lose her to what he considered a minor European principality. He held Prince Rainier personally responsible, believing his jealousy guarded his wife's fame. Hitchcock never found another actress he felt could replace her, and the loss of his Ice Queen muse was a source of professional regret for the rest of his life. Even without a film set, Grace never stopped being a master of her own image. As princess, she meticulously crafted what became known as the look of Grace, a style defined by elegant Dior suits, Givenchy gowns, and her signature white gloves. The Hermès handbag she famously used to shield her early pregnancy from the paparazzi was renamed the Kelly bag in her honor. She understood that her image was her power, and she wielded it with the same precision she had once brought to her acting roles. As the years wore on, her gilded cage became more unbearable. While Grace upheld her duties, it was rumored there was an open secret among the European elite that Prince Rainier was engaged in a long-term affair, adding deep humiliation to her public role. Biographers allege that Grace fell into periods of depression, using alcohol to numb the pain of her profound loneliness. Her focus shifted entirely to her children, but even here she found little peace. Her eldest, Caroline, became a rebellious wild child. Her youngest, Stephanie, was even more headstrong, clashing constantly with her mother's traditional values. It was this daughter who would be at the center of the final tragic mystery. The last weekend of her life was spent at Rock-à-Gel, the family's country estate. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Grace, now 52, was struggling with a deep sense of melancholy, amplified by a ferocious, ongoing argument with Stephanie over her future plans. On the morning of September 13th, they prepared to drive back to the palace. With the car so packed there was no room for a third person. The chauffeur was dismissed. Grace, a notoriously nervous driver who hated the treacherous road, got behind the wheel. The question that has haunted investigators for decades is, why? As the rover navigated a sharp, downhill hairpin turn, it suddenly accelerated, scraped a retaining wall, and then smashed through it, plunging down the rocky hillside. The official story, confirmed by doctors at the hospital, was swift and tragic. Princess Grace had suffered a stroke, causing her to lose control. But almost as quickly, a powerful counter-narrative took hold, born from roadside whispers and fueled by one persistent question. Was Grace truly the one at the wheel? This alternative theory was built on fragments of testimony. A truck driver who had been following the car reported seeing it swerving violently moments before the crash. But the most explosive claim, published in sensationalist reports, came from an early witness at the scene who alleged that a hysterical Stephanie was pulled from the car screaming, "I was driving." It was a devastating piece of testimony that became the cornerstone of the conspiracy. The only problem was that it has been vehemently denied by Stephanie herself and has never been substantiated by any official investigation. For theorists, the motive for a cover-up was tragically simple: to shield a 17-year-old girl from the lifelong public guilt of causing her mother's death. It was a narrative so potent that the Palace of Monaco's subsequent actions, an immediate and total information lockdown, were seen by many not as a family managing private tragedy, but as proof of a conspiracy in motion. The final pillar of the conspiracy is the fact that no formal, independent autopsy report was ever released. While true, this overlooks a critical detail, because Grace was treated in a hospital for over 24 hours where doctors identified the stroke before she passed. A forensic autopsy of that nature was not deemed necessary, a medical reality that is easily spun into a sinister omission. In the end, the search for a hidden truth may obscure the simpler, but no less profound tragedy, that of a woman trapped by her role meeting a random, senseless end on a road she always feared. Then there was the matter of the car itself, the single most important piece of physical evidence. In the weeks following the crash, the mangled wreckage of the rover was taken into palace custody. For many, what happened next was the final, unforgivable act of a cover-up. The car was systematically crushed into a cube and, as legend has it, sunk deep in the Mediterranean Sea. The palace, however, offered a different, more personal explanation. They maintained that Prince Rainier could not bear the thought of the vehicle becoming a ghoulish collector's item. His order to destroy it was not an act of concealment, but an attempt by a grieving husband to protect what little dignity his family had left. Was it a deliberate destruction of evidence or a final, desperate act of love? Like so much of Grace Kelly's life, the truth remains buried beneath two irreconcilable stories. In a hospital room in Monaco, Princess Grace lay in a coma with no brain activity. With no hope of recovery, a devastated Prince Rainier, flanked by his two eldest children, made the agonizing decision to turn off her life support. The world mourned the serene icon, while her family mourned a passionate, complex, and deeply unhappy woman. The funeral was a global event, a somber spectacle of grief attended by royalty and movie stars from around the world. Yet, in a heartbreaking turn, Princess Stephanie was unable to join her family. Confined to her hospital bed while recovering from a serious neck fracture sustained in the crash, she was forced to grieve for her mother in isolation. Her empty chair was not a symbol of the tragedy's unanswered questions, but a poignant and painful reminder of the accident's devastating toll on a daughter who had lost her mother in the most traumatic way imaginable. The House of Grimaldi has to this day masterfully upheld the official narrative of Grace's life and death. They protected her perfect image in death, just as the Hollywood studios had protected it in life. What remains is a story full of holes, a 40-year-old mystery, and the inescapable feeling that the world was sold a beautiful lie from the moment she became a princess. At the end of it all, who was the real Grace Kelly? She was a paradox, a woman of fiery passion who was sold to the world as an icon of ice-cold perfection. She was a master of her craft, an Oscar-winning actress who was forced to abandon her art for a role she could never escape. She was the ultimate outsider, in her own family, in the Hollywood system, and finally, in the royal court she was meant to rule. The fairy tale was the most brilliant and cruel illusion of all, a story crafted first by studio publicists and later by palace officials, trapping her within its pages until the very end. But for some, especially the old families of Monaco, the explanation for this dynasty of heartbreak is not found in psychology or circumstance, but in a whisper from the distant past. It is the legend of the 700-year-old curse of the Grimaldis. The story, dating back to the 13th century, tells of a Flemish woman who, after being wronged by an ancestor of the Grimaldi clan, placed a hex upon his entire bloodline, declaring that never will a Grimaldi find true happiness in marriage. Looking at Grace's tragic end, Princess Caroline's divorces, and Princess Stephanie's tumultuous love life, many believe the curse is not just a myth, but an active, malevolent force. Perhaps then, Grace Kelly wasn't just the victim of a car crash, but the most famous victim of an ancient sorrow. Her life just one more chapter in a story of heartbreak written centuries ago. Thank you for watching. Make sure you click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on a new video. See you next time!